Um, Before I say this, I just want to preface this by saying I'm only speaking from my experience, or mainly speaking from my experience, and I don't want this to badly reflect any groups of people. I don't want to fall into the tropes of like certain narratives that people use in certain race arguments about fathers not being present or whatever, um, among like black families and stuff. Like, I don't want to fall into those kind of talking points or anything. But I'm speaking from my experience, and also there's a little difference when it comes to being a Somali person and just also being a Black American who lives in America. But my life's kind of been interesting where those experiences have been combined. So um, let me just get into the topic. Um, I think there's a misunderstanding and a flaw with the way in which a lot of Somali men, um, in my experience, my dad, but also I have friends who have experiences similar to mine, whose fathers left early on, um, where it's like a misunderstanding of parenting and, just doing it wrong. I kind of think about times like this, the current age I'm at, I'm 26 years old. Um, my dad and mom divorced in 2017, and I haven't seen my dad face to face since I was 20. So it's been 6 years. And, we don't talk very often on social media. I for a while, for the first few years, held a lot of anger towards him and hostility for what he did and him leaving and then his actions when he left. Not trying to fix things at all, trying to settle in a new life instead of fixing the life that he kind of had here. Um, and in my defense, my dad, he has 6 kids here. So the idea of leaving that family when you were kind of the pillar of the household, but also just like financially, you were the man who brought income to the house when we didn't work, when we were focused on school, and my mom was taking care of us, and you kept telling her not to get a job because you had everything, and then all of a sudden you made this big move in 2017 and you dropped the ball and you left. And a lot of other things happened. But anyway, think about these days and the importance of, having a father in early adulthood. And I know it's kind of weird to say early adulthood when I'm 26. I think that's fair to say early adulthood still. Um, I think even like early 30s is still early adulthood in the way that we're still kind of figuring things out. And it's this idea that kind of stems from this like cultural, or I don't know if it's tribalistic or whatever, kind of view that kind of differs from Western society and Western kind of views and practices when it comes to parenting of, the father, is to, his main goal is to extend his bloodline, basically, to have as many kids as possible, to spread, his last name that he carries, just to, you know, kind of like, because in Islam, I guess one of the main responsibilities of a man is to have children, right? So it's like fulfilling this kind of religious duty to have children. And it's this also idea that's kind of an old ideal of like the mom is to take care of the children, to stay at home, to raise the children, to nourish them, everything. And the dad, because we're living in America also, it's a mix with the Western ideals of, providing for the family financially, and this kind of like hope within being practicing religion super hard, and everything. The way in which he presented himself as like holy, just this idea that the things that my kids are supposed to learn, they will learn in due time, and God will help with that, right? There's nothing with having a little faith in God, but there's also a lot that's kind of wrong with not being hands-on with your children in that regard. And, my dad kind of taught me a lot of things, from just like the way he carried himself and things that he did growing up. I can't lie, he was around. There's a lot of kids I grew up around who didn't have, both parents in the picture, you know. And I can't, say my dad wasn't around. He was there. And I remember there's points in my life where I would pray and I would thank God, thank you for having both my parents, be together. Even if I just had like a blowout argument with my dad or something, like, you know what? at least both my parents are together, and I feel safe in this house. Just keep us all safe and healthy, that kind of thing. But eventually, the family unit kind of broke apart, and my dad carried this mindset over with him to Somalia. And of course, went over there when he said that he was going to take care of his dad, got remarried, had a few more kids over there, and it's just kind of been there ever since, right? And so it leaves a kid like me just kind of lost in this world to figure it out on my own. When I have my dad was kind of telling me a lot of things about like, you're the man of the house now, so now I have these adult responsibilities thrusted on top of me. Pause. You know, and I don't even know how to navigate this world. I'm barely an adult. I'm 17 years old. I'm not even an adult, at that point. And I just feel like these days, a lot of these dads kind of take this understanding of like, yeah, you're supposed to be there to raise your kids, right, until adulthood, and then like the world takes care of them, and they figure things out on their own. It's kind of an old-fashioned kind of way, also, of thinking, right? The idea of, my kid, he's a badass kid. He keeps messing with the stove. I'll let him burn himself a few times, and he'll figure it out. The stove is hot. Don't touch it. But there's also just like certain things where it's like, I've learned a lot of like my important lessons that I feel like if my dad was around, he could have navigated me through just because of his lived experience. Where like, if I had a dad around these days that I could open up to about my problems and ask for advice objectively about certain things, just like, I feel lonely, I feel depressed, even like kids these days, they're dealing a lot with like addiction issues. I'm dealing with my own issues. Like, do you have any like advice or guidance, things I could do? And even if I had a parent that kind of like was there and just kind of didn't sugarcoat it and was just like, listen, a lot of the times in life, you're going to feel uncomfortable. You're going to feel lonely. You're going to feel depressed. And that uncomfortability is something you shouldn't run away from, because that is where a lot of growth comes from. And instead of seeking validation from people like me, you should be seeking it from yourself. You need to be able to learn to make commitments to yourself. If you say, hey, I'm going to have a great day today, I'm not going to have any problems, I'm not going to fall into bad habits, that's just not words. That's a commitment. You have to be able to live up to your commitment and fulfill that to yourself. Because if you can't even commit, believe your own commitments to yourself and have validation come from within, boy, it's going to be a problem when you start seeking it from other people in this world. If I had a parent that was around, my dad specifically, because my mom, she'll drop gems on me all the time, but just something about it, if my dad was around and he taught me some of these lessons, because some of the problems I'm dealing with, he's dealt with. Some of the situations I'm going through these days, he's been through. I feel like as a young adult, there are certain things that the world doesn't teach you and that you take for granted just because you're young. I mean, like 20 years old is young, You're living with both of your parents. You don't pay any bills, really. Like, you don't really know what the real world really is. You haven't lived on your own yet. Like, yeah, you have your own stresses and worries and things, but you're still young. I feel like an adult, like, still needs parenting. Like, parenting doesn't stop from when a kid's 18 years and older. You get what I'm saying? Like, it isn't just raising a kid and making sure he's healthy and grown and he stayed alive. It's being there for him and guiding him through this world until the day you're gone. That's why it's a commitment, It's a way of life. That's why having a kid is a huge choice, and we minimize it so much today in society and in this world. You see people who shouldn't have kids having kids and doing horrible things, subjecting their kids to horrible, horrible things because they didn't see having kids as anything, They didn't think about it, A lot of people, at least, from my experience. And if you're not willing to make that commitment, and I don't know, I think it's just one of those things where it leaves a guy like me wandering this world alone, in a sense. Like, I could only imagine how many more productive members of like our society there would be, how many more confident young men there would be if they had fathers that were there, like, and this committed to their life. And like, just the idea of that alone, I could imagine if my dad was still around, makes me feel like less depressed. I'm gonna still be a productive member of society, of course, but it's a hard choice and a responsibility now that I feel burdened to teach myself all these things that I just sort of wish I had somebody with that kind of level of importance in my life that I could have, you know, still had around, a male figure at least. My mom, I'm very grateful for her, but I feel like, and I'm very scared, but she's like the only person I have left like that. And like, God forbid anything happens to her. Like, it scares me, you know? And like the idea of wandering this world completely alone uh, is a fear. And all that to say, I hope what I said wasn't offensive or anything. I'm just speaking from my experience, and I have some friends that don't have fathers that are around because their fathers had these kinds of views. And even in Somali culture and in Somali men, I don't think it's all Somali men. I know I have family relatives, family friends who've had fathers who are around who are like the most wholesome people there. I raised their boys and girls to be strong young individuals. Um, I think of this one person in particular who was like an uncle to me who passed away from colon cancer 10 years ago. And that really hurt. Uh, he had this like cough that would linger and it would hurt him. But, you don't really think much about it. This was pre-COVID too. He'd have like a couple coughing fits a day, but it just turned out that he had this kind of cancer that was just like there that nobody detected until it was stage 4. And then by that point it was everywhere. So, but yeah, I think of people like him, and if they knew what my dad did and him leaving, because him and my dad were cool. If he knew what my dad did, what his response would have been. And yeah, the last thing I'll say is this idea of when a man who kind of grows up without either a mother or father present in their life has children of their own and says, I'm going to be present for my child. I'm going to be a better dad to my child than my dad was for me. I think it's that, where it's like, I'm not going to just raise this child up. I'm going to guide him through life. And if I ever have children, I'm going to do that. So,